Many congratulations, Mr. Kant, for the unveiling of the book. Of course, I think we all know that 2023 year was a pretty bad year for the global economy as a whole for so many different reasons. We saw many leading economies slowing down, fighting off recession, geopolitics, that geopolitical tension also adding to those problems, which is probably going to stretch into 2024 as well. We're seeing the Russia-Ukraine conflict it's not over. And now you have a conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas that is becoming bigger and bigger every day. So these are all challenges that global economies will have to weather in 2024. But I think all leading economists have largely agreed that in this sort of gloomy tale, India's story has stood out. It's been more of a bright spot. And they all agree that India will be the largest growing major economy this year. So that's all good news. When you look at the GDP numbers, when you look at the stock markets, at least on paper, it looks like the India story is a much better story compared to other major economies. But I think we also need to look beyond those good numbers and really assess whether the kind of economic growth we are seeing is equitable, is it uneven, is it unequal, what are the kind of jobs it's generating, and what are the challenges, therefore, and the headwinds that we could expect to see in this year and in the years ahead. So I'm going to throw some of those questions to our panelists this morning, and starting with Mr. Kant. Very honestly, what are the three things that you would say are really going well for India at the moment? And in your honest assessment, what are the three things that concern you about our growth story?
So let me first say that, one of the big things that's happened in India is that we've done a technological leapfrogging. Is we've been able to build a huge amount of digital infrastructure. Everyone has a digital identity. We do, between 2015 and 17, we opened about 550 million bank accounts. We then seeded them with Aadhaar and with mobile number. We do 46% of the real-time fast payments in the world. Last year, we did 118 billion fast payments. Next was China with 28 billion. We then moved to giving cashless, paperless credit. Number of young startups then moved to creating wealth by taking stock market into tier 2, tier 3 cities, and then on to, we now do digital health insurance through startups like Digit and Acco. So there's been a massive technological leapfrogging, which no other country in the world has been able to do. I don't think we truly demonstrated the power of this during the COVID period when we did 2.2 billion COVID vaccination. We were able to put money straight into the bank account of all our beneficiaries. And I think that has been remarkable. The second is that we've built huge amount of infrastructure in the last 8 to 9 years. We built 40 million houses, which is like making a house for every single citizen of Australia. We've built 110 million toilets, which is like making a toilet for every citizen of Germany. We've provided piped water connection to 253 million citizens of India, which is like providing a piped water connection to every citizen of Brazil. We've done 88,000 kilometers of roads, expressways, highways. So we've built a completely new India, which many Indians do not realize. We've built a completely new India in terms of infrastructure. The third key thing which this book talks about is that we built up a sense of competition. And I think one of the key programs that I led in aspirational districts, which is talked about in this book, is that we picked up the 115 of the most backward districts of India. We didn't call them backward. The Prime Minister called them aspirational districts. West Bengal didn't participate, so we had 112 districts. And in 112 districts, on 49 outcomes, we created a huge sense of competition amongst these districts. Many of these districts like Namsai or Buxa, many of you would not have even heard of. They are far-flung districts. They were extremely poor districts. But out of sheer good governance and competition amongst them on outcomes we've made these districts perform many X better than some of the best performing districts of India. Now today, these backward districts are the best performing districts of India on a range of indicators. So these, to my mind, are the three key performing indices, to my mind, which have transformed India in the last few years. And digital transformation in particular is important because the Bank of International Settlement in a recent study has said that what India has achieved in the last 8 years is equivalent to what India would have achieved. It would have taken India 50 years to achieve what India has done in 8 years. So that digital transformation was very significant. The challenges, to my mind, are first and foremost that we need to improve on a huge amount of improvement on nutritional standards, improving learning outcomes, improving health outcomes, because I'm a great believer that if India is to grow at very high rates of 9 to 10% over a 3-decade period, social development, social indices of learning outcomes, health outcomes are very, very critical.
And that's... If I could interrupt, to that extent...
So let me just finish the 3 points.
No, on this point of health and education.
Yeah, I'll come back. So this is number one, to my mind, very critical. Number two is we need to do good urbanization, which is we are doing, if you drive down from Delhi to Jaipur, you'll see urbanization is very poor, unsustainable urbanization. We need to do planned, sustainable urbanization. And the third key challenge for India is to move a vast segment of its population from agriculture. We have too high a population, 42% of our population in agriculture, which must move to urban areas, which must move into manufacturing, and therefore manufacturing must become a key driver of growth. And India must fire on all cylinders: services, manufacturing, urbanization, and enhance its agriculture productivity. These, to my mind, are 3 challenges. Yes, please.
Okay. Let me ask your co-author, Amit Kapoor. Congratulations on the book, Amit Kapoor. On the issue, for example, of on health and education, which is very important for the long-term health of our economy, and yet we actually find that government budget spending on these sectors has been declining. We're not spending as much as we should on these sectors. But also, are you concerned that our growth trajectory is a little more than a little uneven today, where it is those of us who can afford SUVs and who are on the higher end of the income spectrum who feel the economy is doing better. It's doing better for that segment of society. But consumption is very low in rural India right now. The FMCG sector is, showing a decline in profits. And therefore, it's unequal. The rich are getting richer, but the poor are not getting any richer.
So this is an interesting point, but I would like you to compare a few economies per se. If you really look at any country for that matter, it always follows what you would call as a Pareto thing. When you talk about US, there are about 3,300 counties, and out of that, 2,600 counties just contribute close to about just 10% of the GDP. And the other 600 contribute close to about 90% of the GDP. In India, if you really look at it, out of 769 districts, it's 100 districts which contribute close to about 85% of GDP, and 600 contribute close to about 15%. But that's actually a fact which happens across the world. So what we really need to understand is that in a spatial setting, how do you work on it? What I do really see is the kind of processes or the kind of game-changing ideas that the government has actually implemented. One of them is the aspirational district program. Very clearly, we were looking at the whole social progress index per se, and you will notice that there are 50% of the aspirational districts program have actually crossed the basic averages of the other districts in the country. So they cannot be called the aspirational districts any longer. So there is a huge positive uptick that has actually happened. But having said that, yes, of course, we need to spend a little more on education. We need to spend more on health. The question is going to be, what is the process per se that we need to follow? There are always competing priorities that you would see within the country. And in those competing priorities, I think the government is trying to do a great job if you really look at getting people to school itself. Once we have been able to get people to school, we will start talking about educational outcomes. And as Mr. Kant had actually said, we are talking about educational outcomes. We have the national assessment surveys, and the government is absolutely clear that it has to improve over a period of time. The problem here is that a lot of us make a mistake of thinking that competitiveness is something which is just a sprint. No, it is not a sprint, it's a marathon. As a country, we are facing a marathon, or we're fighting a marathon. We are talking about a growth trajectory for the next 50 years. It becomes a pet peeve for people to say that India needs to transform overnight. Nothing transforms overnight. US is a creation which happened over the last 100 years or 200 years with the start of the steam engine revolution. And so, or the railroad revolution out there. In India as well, we are just a 70-year-old country or a 75-year-old country, and we are on the right trajectory. But what I see right now is the focus that we have per se in terms of taking the right steps. If you really look at the principles per se as to what the government is really doing, in fact, we are also talking about it within the book. So what are the 4 principles that we need to follow? One is that we need to have social development. Very clearly, we are doing that. The shared prosperity idea, yes, there are disparities that exist, but they exist across the world. Very interestingly, disparity in India, if you really look at the PLFS data, is lesser than United States today. It is lesser than Europe. A lot of people do not look at the income data. We get obsessed with data that comes from Oxfam because that is more like a wealth data. But where is that wealth data coming from? Or do we actually have a survey for it? So something which is written on paper, which is so flawed in terms of a methodological viewpoint, we actually fall into the trap of that. Let's look at PLFS
But
data.
I'll quote to you our own RBI Consumer Confidence Survey, which just came out. And maybe I'll get Mr. Ajai Chowdhry to reflect on that. That Consumer Confidence Survey shows that if you make more money, if your income is higher, you think the economy is actually doing better. As you go down the income ladder, you don't think it's really doing well at all. So my question again comes to this point of this uneven, I hate the word K-shaped growth because the government keeps denying that it exists. But is that the danger that, we are on this path where it's very unequal and very uneven? Even if you look at the quality of jobs, are we really generating the kind of jobs that we should be? It's very distressing to see even the IT sector. Hiring is down across Infosys, Wipro, TCS. So are we really on the right path?
I think all economists for a long time have been talking about the trickle-down effect. And this trickle-down effect is something that we've all been waiting for. Some of it has happened, some of it is still happening. I think the change that we now need to make to look at how we need to grow, can we continue to grow linearly? We need to ask that question. And I think if we really want to take the next steps in growth, we need to go away from the linear thinking to exponential thinking. And we need to start thinking, should we grow like what China did or Thailand did or Korea did? I think we should look at the Korean model. That's the way we should grow. So that, when it happens, the trickle-down effect will be much, much higher and quicker. So the challenge that we have in the country is that we need to take actions on it now. And I think one of the key things that we need to do is to look at long-term rather than short-term. Today, all our strategies are based on a 5-year cycle. That 5-year cycle we must break. And if we can break that cycle and take a longer-term view, then I think what we will be able to do is achieve what we want to do and faster.
But is that easier said than done? Because elections will keep happening, and it is a politician's instinct to want to address voters. So is that going to be a difficult task to think more long-term, 30, 40 years down the line?
How did digital infrastructure happen? The digital infrastructure happened because a organization outside the government started to work on it. And this was an organization called iSpirit that started this whole process of creating India as a software product nation 12, 14 years ago. They are the ones who've actually helped the country to create India Stack. So they started to think 10 to 15 years ahead. Whether the government thought about it didn't matter. They were outside the government and they did that job and they made it happen. So I think we need to also create some non-government organizations which can actually help achieve that. And that's really what I'm doing from my foundation also. I've set up a foundation called EPIC, and my whole objective is to start to look at electronics and semiconductors long-term and continue to influence whichever government comes in.
I think that's an important point. Mr. Arun Kumar, let me get you in on that, because as far as government spending on infrastructure, etc., is concerned, that has actually been really terrific. And you can see visibly that change in the infrastructure sector. But private investment is just, they're not doing it. They're not doing it as much. And what is it that's holding them back? Consumption is down, yes. But what does India need to do to get private players in on this to contribute to India's growth story?
I would not take a very short-term view again. I mean, consumption is going to be on the up. I mean, we have in India 250 million people moved into the middle class in the last 10 years, and the previous 10 years, another 250 million people grew. So you have a burgeoning middle class that will soon be by the vast majority of the country, and it's an aspirational middle class. They will drive consumption. So I think when consumption demand rises, industry will fill that demand. That's one point I'd make. The second point I'd like to say is that there's some really good really good tailwinds for India at the moment, and geopolitically, because there's a need to reduce reliance on a major source like China for global supply chains, and that's going to mean that more and more manufacturing will have to come to India, where there is the technical talent available to support manufacturing. That's going to again provide another fillip to employment. And thirdly, we have what's called the demographic dividend, essentially a very young, aspiring population, the youngest population in the world, that will again drive demand. So I feel that private sector investment will come in as we see the results of these, and we're seeing the results in a broad way. All of this is, in a way, fueled by the digital innovation that both Amitabh and Ajai spoke about, which brings the benefits of a lot of access, brings access to services down to very low-income levels of the population. So putting all that together, I believe, yes, there may be a short-term decline in private investment, but that will come up. The investments in infrastructure have been great, but there are areas for improvement. For example, to really develop a manufacturing industry, the backward linkages have to be easier. In other words, when you import stuff, it should be easier to import stuff that you will then get exported as part of a global value chain. I mean, there are these kinds of irritants that need to be addressed. Those irritants don't exist in the service industry, where you've got IT services that are just providing services to customers outside the country. And they don't have any inputs.
Is it really easier to do business in India today? We keep hearing about those rankings.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that. So actually, I was a big fan of what Amitabh did when he was in Nidhi, creating a competition between the states on ease of doing business. So that definitely provided a lot of focus. However, if you ask my wife, who's in the audience, who actually set up a biotech company here, she said, I hear you talking to Amitabh about ease of doing business, but you talk to me. I have a problem when I go and sit in an office trying to get. So at the ground level, there's more to be done. But I think the impetus, the focus, I've appreciated that.
Mr. Kant, I just wanted to draw your attention. I'm sure you've read these comments. The US ambassador to India, Mr. Garcetti, said a couple of days ago that India needs to have a better taxation and regulatory framework. He's also kind of warned that while we want to be Atmanirbhar, we shouldn't become protectionist, and talked about what you just touched upon, that FDI is going into places like Vietnam, Mexico. It's not going into India at the pace that it should be. How do you look at his comments? And is there some truth in the fact that as companies look to move away from China, we have the potential to tap into that, but somehow we're not quite getting there yet?
So let me first say that India needs to be a very integral part of the global value chain. And that means that if we are making, say, mobiles here, there are 100 components which come in, which need to come in at zero or very low levels of duty, because then you add value here, you produce them, you are able to export at the cheapest possible cost. So there's a lot of work in progress on the duty structure, and to my mind, that is critical if India is to become a very integral part of the global value chain. I think we need to do this in a range of areas, bring our duties on inputs down very sharply so that we become globally the best manufacturer in the world on a range of items. And I think some work on that has been done. It's been done, in fact, duty on a range of items has been reduced one day before the budget on mobile sector. But let me also tell you that all these countries, look at the United States of America, it's grown with protectionism. It's now becoming a champion of, through its CHIPS Act and its Inflation Reduction Act, it has said that we will provide subsidization only to companies which produce hydrogen in the United States of America. It's protectionism of the highest order. And let me tell you also that each one of these European countries have grown with protectionism. So don't get carried away by what the US ambassador is saying. And the US ambassador is speaking the US language. We should speak the Indian language. And that will make India a global champion. We'll make India a global champion by making in India. We'll make India a global champion by producing, by getting the best practices, not necessarily following what the American ambassador is advocating in India.
So
and to my mind, Americans do protectionism and they advocate laissez-faire for developing countries. And exactly the same they have done for climate change. They have consumed 90% of the carbon space in the world. 90% of the carbon space they have occupied in the world. India should be entitled to 17.5% of the carbon space. We've taken only 1.5% of the carbon space. And they are telling us that you achieve they are neither providing you finance, neither are they providing you technology, and they're trying to teach you lessons. So don't go by what US ambassador is telling us. We should do what is in the interest of India. We should do what is in the interest of the Indian citizens.
Thank you for giving us a good headline for the papers tomorrow. But Mr. Arun Kumar, you've served in the US administration. Mr. Kant makes a point. There is so much hypocrisy that does stem from these arguments, when the West, sort of lectures us on how to, conduct our economy. But at the same time, we are looking to grow as an economy. Can we afford to ignore these comments?
And first of all, let me say that Amitabh and I worked very, very constructively in lifting the US-India economic relationship going back to 2014. In fact, when Prime Minister Modi came up with the Make in India program, which a lot of people said, is this a protectionist program? We were on a stage together in Washington, D.C. talking about it. And it was talked about as a program to develop manufacturing in a competitive way in order to create employment. That said, I also want to say that the US-India relationship is a very strong one. And in fact, a lot of the potential we're seeing in the future for both countries will come from a stronger relationship. For instance, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which both countries are working on, is a place where about half the world's population can work together on very key areas of collaboration, whether it's got to do with energy or trade or social justice and so forth. So I see lots of areas of great collaboration. I also see a keen focus today on critical and emerging technologies, which both countries have tremendous talent. And if Bangalore and Silicon Valley are working more closely together, there's a lot more that can be achieved. So I just want to kind of put this a little bit in perspective, that I don't think the US is trying to talk down or anything. I think the relationship is one of great mutual respect in both sides. So it's not that there is any talking down. So I'm not in the room, but I don't believe that Eric Garcetti is going to talk down. So there is respect, and I know that we were both on the same page to build the relationship. And I'm sure I actually think this relationship is going to be a catalyst for tremendous growth for both countries.
I have to open it up for audience questions in about 40 seconds. Mr. Chowdhry, would you take those 30 seconds of the 40?
Yeah, you asked about what we need to do. I think very importantly that needs to be looked at. And I think we've depended too much on services out of this country. There are clear headwinds for services today. Gen AI, etc., is going to really hurt the software exports industry. So we better be clear that we just can't be dependent in the country on services. And we've got lulled into thinking like that. So we've come into manufacturing, and Amitabh took a huge lead in coming out with this whole manufacturing strategy and PLI, and they worked very hard on creating that. But one thing we've forgotten, we don't make products in India. We need to make products in India. And we need to be a product country. We need to be not China plus one. We need to be China plus two, where we bring in science, technology, engineering, R&D into making products in India. And if we can do that, we can replace China 15, 20, 30%. And because the trust deficit that China has today, we can take advantage of that. So we cannot be Vietnam, and we should not be Vietnam. Vietnam doesn't have scientific and engineering capability, which we have. So we export $39 billion worth of ER&D services out of India. But they are all transfer price. You actually take the actual value, it will be $100 billion. Now, we have that capability. We do not utilize that capability to create products in India. So India must now move from low-value manufacturing to high-value, where we actually create products and make them genuinely in India. This make in India just for manufacturing at 4% and 8% margin is not going to get us anywhere.
I think that's an important point. We'd like to open this up for a few questions from the audience. We have about 10 minutes or so. The young man in the front, please. Can we get the mic? Yes.
Thank you. Hi. My question is to Mr. Kant. I think you mentioned about the FDI when we were talking about the FDI. The first standard response that people hear whenever Indian government talks about getting more FDI is, let's give them subsidies. Let's give them subsidies or reduction in tariffs and duties. I personally feel that it's a bottom of the pyramid game, and two can play this game. And Vietnam is anyway lower than us in the manufacturing cost and the labor cost, and that's always the standard response. And I think only Ajay sir talked about it in the last 30 seconds.
So, the important thing on that is that India must get the size and scale of manufacturing. If you don't have the size and scale of manufacturing, when Maruti came in, it brought subsequently Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 manufacturers also came in. The entire value chain came in. And then you have backward-forward integration. You throw up a lot of MSMEs along with that. So, to my mind, we need many more large manufacturers for the MSMEs to grow and prosper in India. And that is critical. And what the production-linked incentive scheme was aimed at is that you build size and scale. We'll support you 1 year. You grow bigger, you go bigger, 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 bigger. For 5 years, the country will support you to become big. And when you become big, you will always do value addition in India. And that's why I'm a great believer that many of these companies are collaborating with the United States. Actually, I opened up the gates. I worked with America so that we could work in collaborative partnership. But let's not get carried away that we need to work with the best companies from around the world. But India needs to get the size and scale of manufacturing. And secondly, we must export. We must be globally competitive. What the book talks about is how do you become competitive? Because if you're not productively efficient, if you're not competitive, you will never be able to capture global markets. And without exports, India cannot grow. Every time India has grown, it's grown on the back of exports. We must learn the art of penetrating global markets. And that requires that you must be a top-class manufacturer.
Yes, please. I think in the back row there. Yeah.
Ajay sir, this is my question to you. I wanted to ask, what type of policy do you envision would actually increase the STEM or like R&D to like sort of actually be indigenized, and instead of going to a foreign company to actually, like, how do you envision the government to incentivize Indian companies to make products and to design, essentially, like to move from manufacturing to design?
Very good question. Actually, I think startups are going to play a huge role out here. And if we look at the startup area in the last 4 to 5 years, we've really done nothing to actually help them. A lot of great startups with real IP have actually moved out to Dubai and Singapore and other countries. So now we need to take a very strong view that as a country, we must invest in startups, give them opportunities like what DARPA did. DARPA created industries by challenging them and saying, make products in the country. We'll give you business if you make products in India, in the country. That's the kind of model we need to bring in. India has a huge government buying capability. That government buying capability must come into play. I called it demand aggregation. And if this demand aggregation combined with support for R&D in startups and other companies is done, then we can actually have a nice virtuous circle by which we can be successful in designing and making products in India.
Yes, please. In the back.
with the agriculture sector is shrinking and the manufacture sector is increasing, in the future there would be where would we get our food from, and the basic vegetables and fruits will get more expensive because farmers are moving into cities for job working in industries. So that is and cities are not worth living if we compare them to the cities in other countries, if you look at the big Indian cities. Thank you.
Amit Kapoor, would you like to take that?
Your question is deeply flawed, in fact, if you really look at it, like, because if, in terms of, say, farming, if there is a reduction in number of people who are farming, that is the trajectory any economy will take. If you really look at the United States, only 2% of the people are employed in farming today. In India, it is close to about 35 to 40%. It is imperative that as a growing economy, the number of people will reduce. Today, we have technologies which is actually going to improve the productivity of agriculture multi-fold. If you look at hydroponics, it can actually increase your productivity by at least 10 times. So today, India is in a position in agriculture, if we are able to get our land thing right, if we are able to move forward, we can in fact reduce the land usage by about 75% and still manufacture the same amount of food. So we are in a very, very good position. This is a very scientific thing that I'm really talking about, and it's a possibility for the future. In terms of the cities, I think when you talk about urbanization and how cities grow, we are at a stage where cities will start improving the quality of life. There is that emergence of cities that has happened. Of course, the cities are getting very, crowded and so on and so forth. But the question is, with the kind of new infrastructure we are anticipating and we are envisaging, things will improve. Today, the biggest change that has happened in the last 5 years is about work from home. How many of us will have to commute to our locations for work, etc.? Things will change dramatically over a period of time. For cities, it is all about live, work, and play. And all those things are quite distinctly possible within the Indian cities per se. What we need to do is that how do we create a situation where the inner cities become far more prosperous over a period of time?
We have time for one last question. Has the mic run away from us? I think the mic is coming to you. Right here. The gentleman in the red shirt. Yeah.
Hello. It helps to wear pink, people can catch your eyes. Kant sir, you mentioned one of the biggest challenges, or the first challenges, is health and education. And India being such a big workforce, do you think the reason our health and education has deteriorated over the years is because it becomes more privatized, more commercial driven, there are a lot of private players? And if that be the case, what's the way out of it?
No, it's not deteriorated. Let me tell you, we have huge challenge because of population, 1.4 billion. The first challenge was that we are able to provide schools to every block, every village. So we provided schools. But now we find that though we've provided infrastructure, the learning outcomes as shown by NAS, National Achievement Survey, and the ASER survey, is that learning outcomes have not improved. So now there's a huge focus on learning outcomes. There's a massive focus now on, and you will see this improving in the next couple of years, huge focus on learning out. Similarly with health. And what now the focus on Anganwadi, focus on women-led development, focus on ensuring that we are able to break this vicious cycle of a pregnant mother giving birth to a weak child, which is leading to malnutrition. All this we are working through ASHA workers and Anganwadi workers. A lot of work is happening. Look at Ayushman Bharat. We are providing health insurance to 500 million people in India, all cashless, paperless, digital. You can move from Tamil Nadu to Bihar with your health insurance. Nowhere in the world does this happen. But it's all work in progress, and you will see the impact of this in the next 4 to 5 years. So it'll be a changed India in health, in nutrition, in education, with the new education policy in the next 4 to 5 years.
Thank you very much.